authorized to offer you promotion, Demidov, in the new state security.
You will have a great life if you do as you are told.
I had to tell him his son died of a tragic accident.
It was a lie.
My boy was murdered.
Murder is strictly a capitalist disease. You're flirting with treason.
The man that killed my son, he's still out there.
Welcome, everybody, to the Next Reels Film Board, a monthly gathering of the Next Reels gang of thugs to take on a film in theaters right now. This month, we're off to sunny Russia for a romp through the set of CSI Stalingrad in Daniel Espinoza's Child 44 from writer Richard Price. Before we get into that, please allow me to introduce our most respected thugs in residence, weathering the icy cold of a Vladimir winter, sporting a one-of-a-kind stole of rat fur, Andy Nelson.
Perestroika!
And the haunting shadow of his former self, malnourished from his diet of wooden nickels and regret, Tommy Handsome back on the board.
Russian things!
And still reeling from his last night at the orphanage when all he got for Christmas was lonely, Justin Jaeger. And me, clearly struggling to find anything funny about the setup of tonight's film. I'm Pete Wright. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us to talk about Child 44. Before we get into the show, you should learn more about us at thenextreel.com/filmboard. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Next Reel, and make sure to subscribe to the show for free in iTunes or your favorite podcast application. Gentlemen, the film. I have been refreshing Rotten Tomatoes over the course of this week leading up to seeing this film, and over that period, its freshness rating has fallen precipitously, landing tonight at 27%. On 49 reviews. I really, genuinely, deeply want to know how you feel about this film, how it stood up to your grueling line of critique. Starting this evening with Mr. Jaeger.
Hello. So I actually kind of liked it. I was pleasantly surprised by some things, and I will highlight those because the other things are not nice at all. I like the story. I think it's actually an admirable attempt to do a parallel intrigue story in this place in time, and I don't know how I would go about it. So the reason why I start that with that positive is because all of the negatives that I may end up talking about at any time during this podcast, I need to sort of hedge with that. I think it was a really tough proposition for what they were trying to do here, and I want to give some credit to that. And I liked a couple of the actors, which I didn't think I was going to like either. So that stuff being said, I think technically the movie is really terrible. There were a lot of things that were extremely distracting, and in general, if I focused on those things, I would be really frustrated. But the fact that the story interested me kept me riding along the way, and actually pleasantly surprised, not hating myself as I left the theater. I'm
going to say that's not as glowing as we might have heard, but definitely not 27% fresh. It's better than that, so I call that a win. Andy?
Well, as I had alluded to in when we talked about the trailer and I don't know, a few other times, I had read the script for this, or at least I thought I had read the script for this. When I came to actually watch the film, I kept waiting for certain plot points to happen that never ended up happening. And then I realized that it was completely not the film based on the script that I had read. The plot point was that there was this, and I swear it's frightening how similar the stories are, but it goes off onto this thing where these children who are disappearing are actually getting integrated into this place where they're taking all these orphaned Russian children and trying to create like super smart super children out of it to grow up and kind of create the new Russia. And the ones that didn't work, then they would just leave as dead bodies around. And I kept waiting for that. Yeah,
wow.
And I kept waiting for that to happen because I enjoyed it so much more than I enjoyed this. This I really had a hard time getting into. I agree it had some things going for it. and I wish that there was something that gripped me more. And looking at some of the reviews for the book, it says, a tightly woven, ingeniously plotted, high-voltage story. The atmosphere of paranoia and paralyzing fear is brilliantly portrayed and unremittingly grim. I think reading some of the reviews for the book, I just feel like Ridley Scott, when he decided he was going to get this made, saw something in the book that clearly would make a really interesting story, and I just don't think it was translated well. I give them maybe a C+ for effort, but I really had a hard time getting into it. And I agree completely with JJ about technical problems with this left and right.
Okay, I think we're building a narrative. Tommy.
They got the grim part right. I guess I would say to agree with JJ for about maybe 20 minutes. I liked it in the beginning. But then once Tom Hardy and Noomi Rapace, is that her name?
Noomi.
Once Tom Hardy and Noomi Rapace got deported to Grosstown, the film just became progressively more ponderous, tension-free, and unfocused, and I felt it just got stupider and more overstuffed, and I ended up hating it.
Ooh.
Sorry.
Ooh.
Yeah, right?
Oh.
Oh, snap.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I thought it was patient. It was a patient story, and that comes with its own problems. I think it was patient for the wrong reasons. I did like the story, but I think I'm more like the intention of the story than the story itself. I liked the period and the setting. I love Tom Hardy. I love Noomi. I love Joel Kinnaman. I regret not seeing more of Gary Oldman and Jason Clarke, who were woefully underused in this film. But sadly for me, the performances and their presence of these people that I really do like a lot. The film cannot stand on that alone. It was, as I agree with all of you, technically weak. Weird errors, like how many times did they break the 180-degree rule? I mean, they swapped camera. They moved that camera around like a fifth grader with an iPhone. I mean, it was just it was bizarre. The crazy amateur technical things that I picked up on, and I'm not a technician. The biggest challenge for me, though, was the fact that there were two stories going on here, and it felt like the film could never commit to either. And yep. I deeply wanted it to commit to one, and at some point, I didn't really even care which, and maybe that's another telling thing. But overall, it was. I love the intention, the execution, as you guys have said, was really tough. And as I texted, it seems like others were just not even getting the vibe of the film. I mean, I was sitting in the theater, and 8 minutes to start, we were all alone in this great on opening weekend Saturday afternoon. It seemed like a really strange, haunted theater. So very sad.
I think we are the four people that have seen this.
That have seen this film, right?
Well, it didn't even crack the top 10 for its opening Friday. It's way below. I mean, Cinderella and Monkey Kingdom and Get Hard and all these other films that got into the top 10.
And even with this cast, I mean, that's a crazy thing because and the cast actually ended up being a little bit distracting for me because along with what you said, Peter, I really liked Hardy and I didn't expect to. I thought he was going to fail. I mean,
really,
there's no reason for me to think that except I just thought this was going to be a big stretch or a leap for him, and it wasn't. He was great. He was super likable, and I felt the same way about Kinnaman. I didn't like Rapace so much, but the other actors, the other great cast people that were in there are big enough names so that they were distracting. In other words, I love Gary Oldman, and I don't think they used him enough, but I don't think he did a great job with what he had either. And I felt that way for everyone. I mean, in the last, 7 minutes of the film, they want to throw us Tywin Lannister and see how he, takes on Russian. That was just
that was
terrible
sad.
choice
that was
for
super
me there.
sad.
I think the film would have been better served by putting in, hungry young actors that wanted to, more fresh, right? Faces that we hadn't seen, to try this and to try to get it right. I think it may have come off better for me instead of trying to think how these marginally big names fit into this movie.
I agree with that, and I think a lot of the problem is that it's such a prestige project, and that the book was enormous. And Richard Price is one of my favorite writers, not necessarily for screenplay, but ever since Clockers, the book, not the movie, I love him and all of his The Wire friends and stuff. And I think the screenwriting was a huge problem with this movie, but I think like everyone jumped on it because this was Oscar bait.
It sure seems like it was, yeah.
And it turned out to be completely the opposite.
That is a real shame. Andy, where do you stand on the casting and the accents and the stunt casting of this film?
I completely agree. I had such a hard time with so much of the cast, from Jason Clarke. I mean, like JJ said, it's so distracting seeing these people in here. And then I kept thinking back. It's like, okay, what was Jason Clarke's? How did he figure into this again? And like, why was he somebody we were focusing on? Like, I really just couldn't even remember what that element of the story was, other than just to show us how awful it was to live in Russia in this particular time. And then I was waiting for Charles Dance to show up because he's in the credits at the beginning. So I'm like, okay, well, we still haven't seen him. So where is he going? Or did I miss him? What happened? And it was really distracting. And the accents, I had a really hard time with the accents. I understand it's Russia, but everybody has these like half Russian accents that sometimes work and sometimes didn't. And I actually found it hard to listen to sometimes. Like I just trying to latch on to what they're actually saying. It's just a little.
Did anybody get it right for you? Did anybody come off as completely believable throughout?
I don't hang out with enough Russians to really know what an accurate Russian
Andy, you
accent
got
is.
to. They're the best. They are the best.
But I mean, I thought actually Tom Hardy did. He seemed to do pretty well. He seemed to kind of stay in character pretty well.
At some point, didn't it feel like he was the only one that was trying?
Yeah,
because that's how it felt like to me. I mean,
yeah.
But, so maybe I'm the only one that thought I had something to say about Tom Hardy's accent. The problem with him, for me, it wasn't the accent. It was that it seemed like he was speaking broken English in a Russian accent at times. And that doesn't make any sense because Russians know how to speak Russian fluently. They're from Russia. But he would say things like, oh, like from surgeon? No one in their native tongue says like from surgeon. They say like from a surgeon. Like as the movie goes along, I think it sounds like he's one step away from starting every sentence with how you say? And that doesn't make any sense because it's their native language.
And that's the language problem with all these things. I read some IMDb quotes about this, the debate about the accents here, and they brought up Valkyrie and the switch that they make in Valkyrie to switch from German to English in that, and that they thought, oh, this is much better. But the problem with it is if someone's going to attempt it, if Tom Hardy is going to try to attempt it, they actually have to do the broken English part of the translation, because when a Russian is speaking in English words with a Russian accent, there's literally words in English that don't exist in Russian. So to actually get the accent right, you have to. I mean, it's just the weird thing of that when you do
just
it.
Stupid. Like, who is that for?
Yeah, and then they should just give it up.
I'm really proud of you knowing that. Like, I think that's fascinating, but that's also like, who are you being so honest for? He just sounds like an idiot sometimes.
But see, I wonder about that because you know what, Tom? I mean, I maybe I'm the only one among us. We do hang out with Russians, and because of my wife's
my
role,
best friend is a Russian,
and there, we've got a large community of Russians here in Portland, and so we've I hang with Russians, and I'm telling you, I think Tom Hardy's performance was actually pretty darn good, and found it really believable. Even people who
speaking English,
because they speak the same way. What he got is what JJ's describing. It's like even people who speak fluent English, they slip. They don't include words naturally because it just sounded pretty natural to me. I didn't run into any of those issues, and I thought Numi actually did a nice job as well. I found her to be to sound fairly, if not completely naturally Russian. She sounded consistent throughout the film. There were others that I thought were really tough. I think actually one of the soldiers might have been Irish. There were things that just didn't work in isolated places. But those two parts I thought were pretty darn good.
Yep.
And I wonder, I guess to that point, Tommy, I mean, I really wonder if you were to hear someone speaking with a thick Russian accent but getting it all right in English, if that wouldn't cause you to notice something equally off. That's my only point.
And that's where the conundrum exists, because if you're trying to speak in a Russian accent, you have to make the failures that Russian native Russian speakers speak when
Right.
they speak English. Otherwise, it's just false. So,
But when they speak English, so why? So, but to go to
You're
Pete's
right.
point of, I mean, when because I understand Pete what you're saying, but everything in what we're talking about is based in them speaking English, not their native tongue. That's when you drop words. That's when you drop those little words that are called, I don't know what, articles, whatever. Who cares?
right.
And I
English,
like
am
that
I right?
I like that I'm messing up English while I'm yelling about this. But the point being that if you were Russian and you heard a Russian speak, would they literally sound like that? Would they sound so broken-y, I'm searching for this word, or losing a whole part, not whole parts, but just like little parts of sentences?
I don't think that is a fair argument because this movie isn't for Russians speaking Russian.
Right.
This movie is for Russians pretending to be Russian, or people pretending to be Russian speaking to
Right.
English people based on their perception of what Russian sounds like.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough because it brings in, I mean, even the fact that we're having the discussion makes it kind of distracting in the film, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, that makes sense. What all you guys are saying, that we need that, and maybe I'm speaking too much for you guys, but like that we need that disagreement, that verbal sort of disagreement, in order to make this work. And I'm just surprised because, I mean, Pete, you brought up the idea of if you had, which is fascinating, and I haven't been able to think it through yet, is if they just talked perfectly in these Russian accents and talked perfectly, I would assume that I would have been fine with it. Why wouldn't I?
Well, that is, I think, the question.
Yeah.
I think if you have any experience with a native Russian speaking their version of fluent English, and they haven't really concentrated on that level of perfection in conversational English, they will drop the words. That's my experience is pretty limited. So
it's okay. So what you're saying is that it's made for American or English speakers that hear Russian people talk. Okay.
Yes, yeah, and there's a
It's
certain
that is
accepted.
a weird, complicated choice.
It is.
Oh, but that makes sense if you're saying that that's sort of shorthand.
Yes,
For
that's
how
what
we're
that's
gonna
what
be
I'm
okay
saying.
with
Like that's the choice. You either make that choice and say we're going to try and make this as sort of legitimately appropriate for the ear of our audience, or we're going to go, completely fluent. In which case, we should probably just do it subtitled.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. This podcast is about dialect, right?
It is the dialect. We spoiled dialects.
It is tricky, though. It is tricky, though. I mean, thinking about, this is something that filmmakers have to figure out at the beginning of any project when they're getting started, when it deals with a different language. How are we going to tackle that? Are we going to have them just speak in their native dialect, whatever it happens to be, English or Welsh or whatever it is, or are we going to make them all speak with a Russian accent, or are we going to do it,
or all
do
British
the whole thing,
accents,
or all British accents, right? Because that's Americans like to do that. We'll have them all speak with a British accent because it's European. It sounds like they could be from there, or do it all in Russian and then subtitle it. It's something that filmmakers are always dealing with in these films, and it's just one of those interesting things to see how different filmmakers deal with it and how it ends up working.
Well, and I think that's the only other sort of option. I think had they actually done it in Russian with subtitles, it would have been, I mean, it's already been torpedoed in the box office. It would have been damn near impenetrable had they actually done it subtitled. Then it's
and considering that Russia banned the film, that it wouldn't have helped their case any if they had it all in Russian.
But the other question is, I mean, why accents at all? I mean, do you feel like the accents? Clearly, we had some problems with the accents, but why? Is there a room to just say, you know what, we're just going to do this, and it's going to be completely straight up, Tom Cruise American English?
I think it's because the cast is international. So because they have so many differing accents, they had to settle on one to get somewhat in a middle range.
Yeah, that's
because otherwise you'd be ending up with, like you said, the kind of, you had the faint hint that one of the soldiers was Irish. Well, think of all the different origins of all the actors. I think they needed to say, you're going to try to do something, or else they'd all sound so vastly different that it would just be a mess.
Huh? Smart. I don't like the new guy. A little too smart for my taste.
All right, so let's do our best to dive in just a little bit to what this movie was actually about, if we can figure it out. And here's the premise. The film was pitched as a murder mystery, a series of nasty child murders, 44 of them. It's in the title. And that we have this sort of investigation. The trailer is very clear. It's an investigation into these child murders. Is that what the film ended up being about for you?
Maybe about a third of the time. I felt like weird. I don't know how to express this. Like, I felt like because I already said that the film was unfocused. I felt that the film was unfocused and overstuffed. That I felt like completely wrongly, because it was really the part that I was the most interested in, that the film every once in a while was like, oh, right, the child murders. We've got to go back to that. Even though that is the driving point, I felt, for the movie, because it deals with so many other issues that that's why it felt so unfocused to me.
Is that the story that you ended up wanting to see, Andy? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I would have rather have just settled on the child murder story. I mean, again, going back to the book, reading about it, it deals with all this Soviet era problems that they were dealing with, where the state kind of is running things, and they're just the paranoia. They also, according to the Wikipedia, the book also deals with the education system, the secret police apparatus, the orphanages, homosexuality in the USSR, mental hospitals. It deals with, there's so many things that it's dealing with. And I feel like they were trying, like the writers and the director, they were trying to capture a lot of that to kind of help us get a sense of this world where the story was taking place, which is an interesting world. But when you're focusing the whole thing on just this child, murder case, it just feels like all that other stuff is it's confusing the issue. I think I would have been happy either way if it focused solely on the child murders, or if it focused more on just this horrible life in Russia at the time. But having it all mixed together, I just don't feel like they were able to find focus.
Agreed.
I think that's I agree, and I think this is one of your sort of pet platforms, Andy. I think is the struggle of adaptation. What it takes to take a book and turn it into a movie in a really smart way. In this one, man, to your point, they gave the mental health apparatus literally one line. In the film, the homosexual challenges in Stalin's Russia, they gave a couple of lines, a scene maybe, but it was completely tossed aside.
Just used for propulsion of the child murder case.
Right, exactly, but
in a way that seemed like too distracting.
Really bizarre kind of a way. It was really distracting. It's like we're going to shoot up a flare on all of these issues that are otherwise significant, that you're going to think your gut is going to tell you, holy crap, they're making this about the homosexual issue in Russia and the fact that homosexuals are persecuted. Oh my God, they're making this about the mental health. We have to care about all those things, and then they don't follow through on any of them. And it ends up making you, I think at least it ends up making me sort of distracted from the story as a whole. I actually liked, as I said in the beginning, I liked both of these stories. I think they're two movies. One is an escape from Stalin's Russia. Wouldn't it be great to see, Tom Hardy's character come to his transition, his transformation, his growth is, oh my goodness, look what I've been doing, and this is not who I want to be. I'm taking my wife. We're going to rebuild our marriage. We're going to move and adopt these kids, and it's going to be a whole thing. And we don't need the child murder at all. I'd watch that movie. I'd also watch the child murder movie. I'd watch that whole thing.
Right. I think that you touched on it a little bit, Pete, when you talked about and with Andy's idea about adaptation and the difficulty that it presents here as movie as the medium versus book. Because if we look at it from a different lens and think about from a story writer's perspective, it's historical fiction, right? So everything that has to do with all those little tidbits, the political intrigue, the mental health, the homosexuality, all the things that they gave a little bit of just a tiny moment for in the film were actually more about setting. This is my contrarian point of view of why I actually like the story, because I actually really thought that was special to me going in. And I think that's what Ridley Scott thought, right? Because he found this piece of historical fiction in book form and had this period in mind. And then there's this story that's woven through. So all that, you mentioned the two films, the Escape from Stalin Russia, that is a film in and of its own, but that's simple in the first way of thinking about it. And then the child movie, the murder movie, is simple as well. I think the challenge that maybe excited Ridley Scott. And the thing that I think is great about this is that they try to show you both, and that everything that has to do with political intrigue is about the setting for the historical fiction, and the child murder mystery movie is the fiction. So the way that I'm evaluating it, or the reason why I love it, is because there was a lot to be put in for setting, and that makes the other story, the fiction story that's in there, interesting. And that's kind of why I liked it. I agree that it isn't executed well. I agree that at some point you get kind of lost in where you're supposed to care. It seems like the filmmakers got lost too, and they put more importance on one and the other and switch that back and forth, and that's difficult, but I think that speaks to the challenge of what they were trying to accomplish here, and I thought it was admirable. I liked both stories, and I was interested in both of them.
Both of them enough. You're interested in both of them enough to make a solid premise on its own.
I don't know if I can say that much to it, but I think those stories. Say it. The idea of this period in time in history with this fictional story in it, I hadn't seen that before. And I think that's special. And I think that's probably why they thought this would be a great movie to make. And I guess I sat in admiration of that. And I liked learning about both stories. Again, I think the execution is where it failed.
Yeah, I think you just described why. We did this as a trailer pick on the show a couple months ago, and that I think was almost to the letter why I said I was interested in seeing this film. I think it was. I think the period and the sort of the cultural conflict, these multiple sort of competing ideologies that all come to a head in this period in time. Post-World War II, Stalin's Russia, reintegration. I mean, it's just a crazy period in history, and I think that's a really interesting setting. But again, I don't think that the escape, the sort of transformation story, is that simple, and I think that's a problem because, in this case, it was played off as pretty simple. It got super muddy right in the middle when they get arrested, and we have to figure out kind of what is going on. There was a whole twist where I thought at one point that maybe he was intentionally sent to this. He was captured and sent away from Moscow and sent to this other thing. And this other city, and the first thing he discovers as now a demoted infantryman is another child murder. I thought this can't be a coincidence. That's just way too easy.
It's convenient.
Well,
it's insanely convenient.
But Nesterov thought that too. So you were just right in the story with that. I mean, honestly, that was what Gary Oldman was saying to him.
But see, that never paid off. That was never resolved. So insanely convenient for us and the two actors, but clearly not for the writer or director.
I agree with JJ that it's a fascinating world, but as he was saying, it's all in the exhibit. I admire the story, and I bet the book is great. The film let me down across the board. I mean, from writing and beyond.
It boils down to the world building. I mean, yes, world building is great. It's great to put all this in there and really kind of create this sense of this place where the story is taking place. But to have us focusing and jumping from things, I think it really ends up becoming distracting. And I think, I think a lot of it falls on, from my perspective, on Richard Price's adaptation of the book, and then Daniel Espinoza's terrible directing.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's go into that because all of us have said there were technical issues that bothered us enough to make note of them in this film. Andy, talk about terrible directing first.
I just felt that he didn't have a good handle on the story and really the thread that he was trying. I mean, he knew that the child murder was kind of the thread that he was following, but I just felt like he wasn't sure how to give the right amount of emphasis to certain things, like some of these other issues that we were just discussing. I felt they were overemphasized. And the child murder, like by the time that we were leading to the resolution of that, and we've got the confrontation in the woods, I almost didn't care anymore because it just seemed like we got to it. So we got to that ending. So I don't want to say haphazardly, but it seemed just a little accidental, and here we are, and we're in the forest, and here he is. Hey, conveniently he stopped, and we're running, and here he stopped his car. We run up the hill, and there he is, and he's got a kid, and that was it.
Car. They were on foot.
Yeah, and I'm like
none of it makes any sense.
He either didn't drive very far, like he went just around the corner and stopped and dragged the kid out, or they just I mean, it's snowy. I guess they followed his tire tracks. I don't know, but I don't know. I just felt like it all just kind of got put together very, very messily, and I just felt like it wasn't organized. And I also just didn't like the way that Daniel had his DP shoot it, especially the action scenes where I've talked about being a fan of shaky cam before, but this was possibly the worst shaky cam that I've ever seen. And I couldn't follow what was going on. It made me sick.
I like that the train action scene was incomprehensible. You couldn't tell what was really going on. And
why
then
do you choose
the director was
shaky
like, okay, for the last one, let's also cover everyone in mud. As if that was going to help. Like, ridiculous.
It was so ridiculous. It made me actually think, clearly they have swapped out all of the actors with their stunt doubles, because that's the only reason you would make this a mud fight of that extreme. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was just ridiculous. I absolutely agree on that one. That the stunts were terrible.
So those are the obvious shaky cam problems. But how about the scene, near to the final scene of the movie, where Hardy and I should say Demidov and Raisa are walking up to their new daughters that they're adopting, and they decide to go shaky cam over their back of their shoulders as they're approaching these girls, and it's never still. Like, what is the purpose? Why? There's no reason why you would do that. Oh, it's so terrible. And then the perspective, I mean, how they set this up. So as you're leading up to the forest, right, he's shooting Demidov and Raisa from the forest. So we're the audience looking at them in the forest. That makes there's no logic there.
Well, as if he was spying on them. That confused me horribly.
Oh, I was so confused by it. And then there were these when they first get to Rostov and they get to the tractor factory. There's literally 3 times that they zoom the camera, and every time it's a manual zoom, and the camera moves as they're zooming. Like, one of the times was when the guy that he got all the information from, the head, the manager at the tractor factory, is up on the stairs, and they start with a wide shot and they push to it, and the camera moves the entire time they're pushing. There's no reason to do that. I mean, you can just do it mechanically. There's no it was so sloppy and clumsy.
I don't even understand can you explain a teeny bit more what you're saying?
Yeah. So anytime and I'll make a generalized statement that Andy kind of touched on earlier. Anytime the camera was moving in this movie, it was pretty much bad. If they set the camera up to move, it's like they had no sense of keeping it still. You could take it from a blocking perspective. They did the last mark before they edited out something. They had doors shut on the camera. They had some of the aerial shots. As they're following the train would go out of the screen and you had no focus. You were back on the forest. There were all these real major problems from a camera perspective, and then also from editing. So if you talk about these zooms, when they got to Rostov, there's 3 times where you have Demidov's perspective. He's sneaking. So their idea, I think, was that they were going to put him looking at a far distance away and then focusing on something, right? So they started with a wide shot.
When he's trying to find the bad guy. So they see, and even more so than the bad guy, he's trying to get information. So he sees the manager up on the stairs going in or out of his office, and they start with a wide shot, and then they push up to him. But as they start the push, you see the camera jiggle, and it never really sent. I mean, just little things like that, like do it again or do something smart beforehand. I see what you're saying. I think I have a guess for that. I think that is, and I have no standing on this at all. I think that what that is a bastardization of what has become a short fix for naturalization. But that's shaky. That's a shaky cam problem. Right? You are there feeling, in a weird way, it's kind of like, just look at it like in The Office. Right. Of that cameras move all the time, and especially in a gritty film like this, that's a dumb way of trying to make it seem less, dollies, less crane, that it's more gritty and more real. You are there. Well, it really is, and it's all over films, like Chronicle and Cloverfield. It's all over found footage films. This isn't a found footage film. Exactly. It just looks dumb. But it's also all over narrative films. It has become, why I brought up The Office is because it is found all over the place a lot of times. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that is a dumb shorthand to try to make things seem more real. I think probably borrowing from found footage, even when they know it's not. It's very different from things like The Office, because that was always supposed to be from a filmmaker's standpoint, that you're very conscious of the camera. Same with found footage. But the same difference is even in TV shows. I've seen it tons in what's the latest TV show that I watched? House of Cards has it. What's the one where they're Togetherness? HBO has it. A lot of narrative, and maybe it's more in TV, which is becoming more and more like film than I know, is when there's possibly no possible camera in shot. That is becoming the new norm.
But okay, so I get that. I guess the part that I see the disconnect with this film is that it seems like the things that you're mentioning are third person perspectives, right? So, and in The Office in particular, it's documentarian, so the audience is aware of the camera. In House of Cards, you're never necessarily looking from a character's perspective. They would do that sort of naturalistic thing as you're the third person omniscient being in the room that can see these things. The thing where it doesn't work here is that, yes, it's natural to see what the character is doing when he's searching for this guy, but the zoom is not. We don't zoom as people. So as soon as you institute the zoom, if you're going to do it, get rid of the shake, because that is, it's terribly distracting. And that's where I have a problem with it. That's a camera, and there wasn't a camera in Stalinist Russia.
And that makes a lot of sense, except for the fact that I think a lot of that stuff still, and I'm sorry to belabor the point, if you guys saw the latest Star Wars trailer.
Oh,
Star Wars trailer. It's filled
rather
with
extravagant.
It is filled with shaky cams and snap zoom. That is J.J. Abrams' way, just like Battlestar Galactica way before him. Not way before him, but in space movies. Battlestar Galactica always had shaky cam and always had snap zooms. That's becoming the new norm.
I would bet that if J.J. Abrams made Child 44, that we would like it better.
Well, and the thing is,
right?
We certainly would.
Let's talk to Kickstarter.
The thing about it is that Oliver Wood shot this, and we've talked about him on the show, Pete. He did all the Bourne movies.
Yes.
And I think the shaky cam in Bourne Supremacy and Bourne Ultimatum is vastly superior to what he did here. And I think it just falls to the director not knowing how to work with the DP and shoot a film in a way that makes sense.
That is, I think, exactly the point. That in the examples you just mentioned, his previous films, you never really lose your sense of place in space, right? Whether it's in an apartment getting thrown out the window, whether it's wherever it is, even on a train, on a moving object, you never lose your sense of place. And I found myself losing place all over this film.
Yep. Yeah. The director's choices set up the DP to make distracting camera moves. I completely agree with that.
Now, he just came off of Safe House. What do you guys remember of Safe House? This is Espinoza.
That's all
Anybody
I remember.
see Safe House?
Don't know it. No.
Okay. Well,
Denzel Washington?
It was Denzel. Yeah, Denzel and Ryan Reynolds. Nothing?
Wait. Oh, Safe House. I loved it. No, I didn't see it. I just knew that Denzel Washington was in it.
All right. Well, this was a good part of the talk. I think I'm gonna bookmark this because I think people are gonna want to zip right into it. To this particular segment.
Well, do you know what happens to people who do not phrase their veiled threats in the form of a question?
I do not know what happens with question.
They did that like 4 or 5 times in the movie too, where like every time they wanted to threaten someone, it started with a question.
Yeah. Do you know I will shoot you? Oh, shoot! I really spelled it out.
All right, let's go back to Richard Price a little bit. I know we've already mentioned Richard Price and love of his some of his books, but let's talk a little bit about structure of the screenplay. Andy, you want to tip off on this one?
I feel like I've kind of said it before. It's just I just don't think that he found the right way to structure the script where he balanced it well enough between the crux of the story, which was this, trying to figure out the child murders, and everything else going on. I never really felt settled in the story, and I think that between Richard and the producers and Daniel, I think that's the problem. I think that the story, it does have interesting elements in it, and I just wish that they could have found a way to build them better. I mean, to me, this felt like, and again, I haven't read the book, but based on the material that I saw, it felt like something that should have been like like a 3-hour movie, maybe one of those just big
TV
epic
series.
sorts of films. Yeah, it really felt like there was a lot of stuff going on here that they could have put in to really flesh this thing out and give us the information that they were trying to without cramming it in and then cutting things that just felt like we probably needed, or leaving things in that we didn't need.
It's the Wire in Volsk.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And I think we just talked about Daredevil, and what's so interesting about Daredevil, the way they're bleeding out information through each episode of this 13-episode series. It sort of feels like that treatment would have been better for this property, like to be able to really invest in these characters, in what's going on in their marriage, in their their struggle with and for children. There's just a lot in here that I think I could really enjoy. But it
absolutely
it just did not.
And
that way.
That's the heart of where this movie fails, right? Because it's 137 minutes, and if you wanted to focus on one of the stories, you could have probably cut 22 minutes of it and made it a tighter film. But they had this allegiance to probably the themes that were in the book, and they didn't know whether it needed to be a 3-hour film, a TV series, or just something simple and wrapped up.
And it does feel like one of those films where they probably, as they were going along, were starting to feel like there were problems. And it felt like people were coming back into it. Some of the producers, or maybe it was Lionsgate, coming in saying, you know what, it's not feeling like it's going in the right direction. Let's focus more on this, or let's focus less on this. And it felt like a lot of fingers started getting into it and kind of changing things up.
But even with that as a possibility, which I think makes a lot of sense, I mean, Moscow. Can we talk about after they get deported to Sootville, or whatever it's called? What's it called again?
Volsk.
Sootville.
Volsk.
Volsk. That's Grosstown. Okay.
Literally Volsk.
The whole part
Blart.
where they go back to it's the Blart town. The whole part where they go back to Moscow. I mean, that's a huge amount of time in the movie. And then when it's all over, the first thing that Andy Nelson, what an idiot, Tom Hardy says. What's wrong with me? No, I'm looking at the screen, and so I have to say the last thing that I've read. The last thing that Tom, and also Andy, you look like Tom Hardy to me. The last thing he says is the first thing he says is Moscow was a complete wash, and that's true of the film. Like not of the whole film, but of that entire thing. Literally nothing really important changes.
You didn't like the set piece in the teacher's apartment with the phone and the finding him out to be a spy?
Not because it didn't go anywhere, and it was just another overstuffed part.
Because what didn't it answer for us? What it didn't answer? It didn't answer whether she was really a spy, and that's the thing that we needed answered in that section, right? We needed to know what happened with her.
It had nothing to do with her. It had nothing to do with the child murders. It was literally, I felt it was a complete wash, and I was wondering if Richard Price was apologizing.
Because I think it answered some of those questions.
Really?
Yeah, I think it said she wasn't a spy. I think it said that she was having an affair with that guy. That's why she trusted him. And that, oh my gosh, they couldn't trust anyone anymore, right? So they went to
but
Moscow.
But they already knew that they couldn't. Okay.
They went to Moscow to meet the witness. That was a waste, and so then they had to get out. Right, that was the real reason they went to Moscow, and then they had to get out. And then the thing that we're not really talking about, which they actually set at the beginning of the movie, was the relationship between Demidov and Raisa. So they set that to be part of the storytelling throughout, and their trust level and the MGB and all of that stuff. So I actually really liked that set piece. That's why I bring it up, and I think that told me a lot and gave me a reason to trust her when I never trusted her before that. Yeah.
And it was worth all of that. To go to Moscow and back with all of the train sequences, there wasn't. I sound argumentative. I don't mean to, but just that the amount of time all of that sequence took. If you had taken it out, nothing changes in the movie. And if it's about learning about more about their relationship and stuff, there's got to be a zillion faster, better ways to do that.
That's probably true. For me, it goes back to that heart of the historical fiction. You can't trust anybody. That's the setting, and that's what I try to say about anything that happened in Moscow, anything that happened, and that goes more to our point of the fact that they didn't know what they needed to put important levels on. So what you're saying, Tom,
so they made
sense.
everything important, right?
So they kind of made everything important, and I like that set piece. That in general, the setting, the historical fiction nature of being in Stalinist Russia, I liked about this movie. So I liked those pieces. I wasn't so much with the child murder side. So that part I actually liked, but I understand what you're saying. If they want to have more focus, get rid of it.
That's interesting because, they actually could have resolved that if it was just the affair question, right? If that's the open question they needed to resolve, they could have done that much earlier in the film, though when they first sort of hung a flag on the fact that this guy existed as they're walking down the street when Tom Hardy was spying on them. But they didn't, and clearly there was a reason. And I hear what you're saying, JJ, and I don't think I certainly hadn't thought of it like that. I'm still not sure that they executed the answers to those specific questions well enough, and mostly I think because I wanted her to be a spy a little bit more than maybe I was willing to admit. I wanted that level of complication to be a part of it because I think that makes their relationship much more interesting. If now he has to absolve himself from the atrocities that he has committed, and he has to come back and rationalize the fact that she was actually working against the state, which he, fostered so much, love for. And so when that didn't happen, I think I blanked on the rest. I think that would have made a more interesting story for me. But you're right, I do enjoy that, and that murder. And let's be clear, this whole movie is about child murders, and really, nobody really talks about the multiple people that Tom Hardy kills throughout this film. And so, where's the investigation on that? In any case, I think that I think the set piece was probably useful but long.
Maybe if it didn't take a train to get everywhere.
God, there are trains everywhere. There's
So
no
many
helicopters
trains.
or even a tank.
Someone needs to count how many times they sound the whistle for the train
Yes.
in the movie. They do it when it's off screen. They do it whenever it's approaching. It's like, I think they're up around the 76 amount.
This is a train. That's what they're saying.
Any other highlights? Or I feel like I should throw a challenge question and ask you to go around and give me one thing about this film that you absolutely adore.
Is that sarcastic?
No, I want you to do it. Give me one thing you absolutely adore.
JJ has things
that you haven't said already.
Oh.
JJ, you go first.
Adore the things that I actually have a good one for this. So, and it's going to be a moment in the film that I think Tom Hardy did extremely well. And that was when he confronts the two girls in the room in the orphanage at the end. And they cut back and forth to him, the girls, and Noomi Rapace a few times, but they go back and forth to Tom Hardy, and he, without words in most of the cuts, goes through a sort of emotional moment where he's trying to atone for all of the confusion and all of the sins that have come with him through the film. And I think he does it really well. And when Noomi Rapace is trying to console the girls in a maternal way, he butts in his thing in a very forceful and says, "I can't bring your parents back." And I was with him on that emotional journey. And again, I don't dislike Tom Hardy. I just didn't think he was going to be able to bring it to this movie, and he did. I actually got choked up in that scene. I was with him on that, and I liked the fact that he butted in, and I thought it was special, and I believed him, and that was something I adored until then they brought in the shaky cam to follow them out of the room.
I really like that you said that because that pivots on mine really well. What would you want to say, Tom?
Oh, I was just saying, do you think, did you guys stay for after the credits?
No.
No.
Oh, because after the credits, there's a scene of all of them around the fire, and the little girls look up at Tom Hardy and say, "Tell us again about when our parents were killed." And it's very sweet.
That's what you adored.
That was painful. That scene was really painful for me. I couldn't even fathom that after all of that happened, that he would even try to adopt those two kids. That I don't know. That whole thing rang so false for me. I had a hard time getting through it. Yeah, I had such a hard time.
Even with his history, the way he grew up as an orphan.
Okay.
Right.
With his history, I guess I can understand him doing it. I just, from the girl's perspective, would never ever go with him. Never.
Even with the Russian orphanage, like the lore of how bad Russian orphanages are.
I don't know. I had such a hard time that they're like, sure, we'll go with you. It's just like, it just rang so false to me. It's like, sure, you're there. You were instrumental in our parents getting killed, but take us and be our new daddy.
But you know what, Andy, and this is why, and I'll just jump in because I think this is the thing that I adore is actually the setup for that particular punchline, which was the actual assassination of their parents on the field, because I really thought that Tom Hardy's reaction during that sequence was, I thought, really good and really genuinely conflicted. And when he goes into the house and sits down next to them as they are, terrified and in tears and just sort of, stone cold, and he starts packing their little dolls in their little tiny suitcases, I thought that was really touching. And as horrific an environment as that, they had created, that was the start of his sort of move down this path of questioning his own journey and his own sort of legacy. And
he was like the best of the worst.
Right, and I really liked it. It was a really rewarding sequence when he punches Vesely in the face, and as he stops him from, doing that. It doesn't actually stop him. But I just thought that was the thing I adored. I thought that was a really well executed sequence.
With this conversation, we go back to your first question, Pete, and the thing of what is this movie about? And for me, based on what we're talking about here, it's kind of changing in my mind, and in a positive way, is that, I'm reading about all this political, everybody's saying it's propaganda and all these things, but potentially the story here for me is about that even in one of the worst times in Russian history, there were people that were part of the bad parts of Russia that cared as well. And then there were those that did not, in addition. So you think about those two stories that we have. We have the setting, and then we have the child murders. Both of those are set to explain that story for us. They just didn't do it very well.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting perspective. It's a story of these brothers. It's his brother's story on this going down these different paths.
The children of Stalin's Russia. I don't know. That's what the story is to me now.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, and that's why the book was probably received so well.
Right. Andy, what'd you adore?
This is hard because I don't adore a lot in this film, but I'll have to say the thing that I ended up kind of liking was the setup and payoff of the conversation that Demidov and Raisa have with all their friends at the beginning, talking about how they met. And then the payoff later when she's talking about how she really felt when she ended up with him and that she was going to have to marry him. I ended up liking that quite a bit, and the fear that she kind of went through of having to marry him, and she knew that it was she had no choice kind of thing. I really ended up I liked that compare and contrast to seeing how romantic it seemed at the beginning to the realities of how awful it really was.
I like that too.
Oh yeah, I had forgotten that, but I think as a counterpoint, I think Tom Hardy's response to her was great too. That sort of I refuse to believe this kind of machismo. Like, of course you have always loved me. Of course what you're saying is a lie. I thought that was just great. Great point.
Again in broken English. Why you say? Why you say? Why you say? Broken English. Go ahead.
Well, and it was helped by the fact that every time Raisa was getting beat up, she constantly was yelling his name. Leo! 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 As if he didn't know that she was getting hit and wasn't going to do something about it. Anyway. Leo! Leo!
Tommy, what'd you adore?
On a much broader sort of part, and this actually goes to... It goes to what JG's saying, what Andy's saying, Pete, what you're saying. I don't know why I singled you out.
Do you even know why I'm talking?
Yeah, no, the basic idea of just that I loved the world, and I was so disappointed by how the movie was handled, but they drill it into the ground, and I get it, and it's the very first thing that you see in the movie, but the idea of, in a Stalin-esque Russia, that murder doesn't exist in paradise, that we can't even believe that murder happens because that's just a Western ideal. And so that there is no homicide division, there's no anything. So the idea of that and the difficulty of trying to investigate many child murders, and then also I'm fascinated by fascism and that kind of, I know that's a weird thing to say, but I'm fascinated by how that sort of goes down from like Harry Potter books and on through the line for everywhere. And when he has to go to the house and tell them that their boy died of an accident.
Yeah.
And then the mother screams, a train can't undress a boy. Some of that stuff that really hit me, of just all of that frustration and that horribleness really gets me sort of emotionally. Yeah, I don't feel great about that answer, but it's an answer.
No, you know what? You did an admirable job with that answer, and I'm glad you were able to listen to your better angels and not just be a downer.
Oh, good.
All right.
I love fascism.
Is there anything, I'm looking at Box Office Mojo, and according to Box Office Mojo, this film made $230,000 yesterday on 510 screens, and that's not great.
Oof. Nope.
Not great at all.
Not great. Any other points that you gentlemen would like to bring up before we get to the moment we've all been waiting for?
There's just no stranger danger in paradise. All of these adorable young children are like, hey, just hanging out by the train tracks like a Russian does. What? You have a suitcase? Let's go hang out. Oof. Yikes. Stranger danger it up, Russia. That's all.
It's the orphans. It's
Fair
the
enough.
children of Stalin's Russia.
That's fair.
Yes, you're right.
Fair. I say it's time to rank it.
Dead kids. Whoa. Talking about dead kids. Whoa, flick chart.
You need to head over to flickchart.com/TNR Film Board, and then you can see all the films that we have ranked as a gang over the last several years and see how these films ranked on your list.
Let's do it. We've got Child 44 or Divergent.
Divergent.
I will pick Divergent.
Divergent.
That was really dumb. I mean, really, Divergent was really dumb. I mean, I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you. I'm obviously overruled, but I just want to, for the record, Divergent was so dumb.
And that says everything about Child 44.
Yeah.
Child 44 or Insurgent.
Child 44.
I will go with Insurgent.
Oh, wait. Which was the first one?
Divergent.
Oh, see, I didn't see Insurgent, but I'm still going to vote Insurgent.
I'm gonna vote Child 44. So
whoa, then maybe I'll abstain. Does that make it more fun?
Then it becomes Child 44.
Yeah, then it's Child 44. All right, Child 44. Child 44 or 42. 44 or 42.
44.
I would pick 42.
I'm gonna go with 42 on this one.
I'm going to go right in the middle at 40. No, I never saw 42. I was absent for that podcast, so I have to abstain.
Child 44 or Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit?
Jack Ryan. I'm going to go Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit.
Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit.
Jack Ryan, Shadow Monster.
Because speaking of Russian accents.
Right. Yes, there you go. Well, yeah, we needed some good old Kenneth Branagh in here to really juice it up a little bit. Oh, well. Child 44 or the Wolverine?
Child 44.
I'll do the Wolverine.
Have we ever talked about those two good scenes in the Wolverine? Just kidding. I feel like those get brought up every single podcast.
I just watched it. I just watched it 2 nights ago, and I think there's more than 2. But
nope,
for me,
it's
the
just
reason
the bullet train and the arrows. That's
I like the arrows too.
The whole movie can be boiled down to 3 minutes of film time.
What about the bear and the bar after the bear?
Don't start about the bar and the bear.
Come on. Oh. No, my point is the reason why I say Child 44 is because I think story trumps technical, and I like the story of Child 44 more. But I totally hear what you're saying.
Fair enough.
Wait, so I don't know where we've landed. Who's where?
I'm Wolverine.
And then JJ, you're Child 44.
Child 44.
I think I'm gonna have to go Wolverine on this one.
That's because you don't know how Rochambeau works.
I hate you.
If it's a tie, you're going to say water or or either water or a bench, and no one's going to know what you're talking about.
Oh, the rage.
Too funny.
Tell me we're finished.
All right, well, that puts it at number 25, smack dab between the Wolverine and Insurgent. 25 out of 33.
JJ, are you okay with that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. On my personal flick chart, which I just did after I saw Child 44, it's actually just one step over the Wolverine. So it's actually right next to it. So it's
right in there.
very similar
there
to
you
what
go.
we just said.
Nice.
Excellent.
I have not done my personal flick chart on it. Andy, where did it end up for you? Have you done it yet?
I haven't done it yet.
All right. Tommy, do you know what flick chart is?
What's a computer? I'm gonna look it up on Bing. All right.
This was a good show. Where do we go from here? Have we have decided, right?
We have decided.
What's coming up next month, Andrew?
We're coming back in just a couple of weeks, actually, and we're going to enjoy a little bit of Marvel action with the big one, Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Wow!
How could we not?
Yeah. That's right.
Love it. Love it. Can't wait to see it.
Very excited.
I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. Tommy Hansen, thank you for being here, as always.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And JJ, second show down. You still feel good? You still feel strong?
I love you so much.
Oh, I love having you here. And Andy, as always, it's a treat. It's a real cupcake.
Yes, it is. Cupcake and a cupcake and a cherry on top.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us, for downloading the show, for listening, for subscribing, which you should totally do for free. iTunes, don't forget. And check us out, thenextreel.com/filmboard. Love to see you around. Thanks, everybody.
Right? Dang, 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 dang. Woo, woo. Now that we're off the podcast, I can actually prove a train can undress a boy. But don't ask me how I know that. I'm a real myth buster.